All right, welcome to episode 2 of the T2T Dynasty Live. Today we're going to be doing part 2 of our Dynasty 101 series. We're going to be talking rebuilds, rookie drafts, and the unique challenges that can be presented when taking over an orphan team. My name is Dylan Carlson. You guys know me as Wicked. You can find me on Twitter at Wicked_Dynasty. And then we got Mike at Dynasty Dog Mike. How you doing, Mike?
Good. How are you? I just got sniped in a Debbie draft, so I'm
Oh
not
no.
super happy. But it is what it is. It happens to everybody.
Yes, it does. If you participate in enough drafts, you know the pain of being sniped. So we can all cry about it together. So, what are you working on over there with your Dynasty Dogs podcast recently, Mike?
So we just did an episode last night. So last year we did a segment called Dog Tags and Dog House. So dog tags are players that we're in on, and dog house are obviously players that we're out on. Players we're trying to sell, move on from. We usually do it by division, and then Rich and I will take two teams from each division and give a player from that team that we're in or out on. But last night we decided to do just rookies edition. So that was a fun one. I got to talk about a guy that I know AJ's a real big fan of because I think he's going to be moving up the draft boards as the rookie drafts go on, and Jermaine Burton. So
Yeah,
especially
he's
with the
getting
T
popular.
Higgins, especially with the T Higgins situation going on right now.
We'll get to that in a couple of minutes, but yeah, Jermaine Burton's been moving up draft boards ever since the draft concluded. I think he's going to be a real good player for them for quite a long time. And then down here below me, I got AJ at AJ_FF Ball. How you doing today, man?
I'm good. How are you?
Strapping away.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here for another episode. Yeah, don't got much else to say.
Yeah, you've been working on anything other than jumping into the Dynasty startups?
Yeah, we're both in two startups going on at the same time right now. Other than that, I haven't been doing much because I am actually in a little training program with PFF right now.
Oh, nice.
Oh wow.
To potentially maybe get a little part-time job there, which would be cool, but it's rather time consuming at the moment. So
yeah, man, that would be awesome.
Yeah, it would. So not a lot of content right now, but hopefully later in the summer I'll get a chance for that.
That's awesome.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, I hope that all works out for you. PFF does a lot of good stuff. I know some people like to bag on them, but I mean, with the way that they analyze and put all those stats out there for us, it's, if it's the only thing you rely on, like some people do, I can understand the argument against, but all the advanced analytics that they've come out with are really helpful for analyzing players and projecting values and how people are going to perform. And honestly, I just find it really interesting to see how people stack up against others in their position groups.
Yeah. No, yeah, they do. I mean, you don't have to agree with everything that their analysts say or whatever, but the idea behind the work that they do is really cool, and I think it's good stuff.
Yeah, so we'll get into a couple of quick news items here before we get started. T. Higgins has still not signed his franchise tag ahead of OTAs. Curious to see if and when he signs that tag. I got to imagine he's going to. The thing with the franchise tag is you don't have a lot of leverage, and it's a ton of money to give up on, not signing that tag. So I got to imagine that he's going to sign it at some point. But maybe there's an extension that can get worked out before the deadline for that to happen. Or, maybe they really like what they're seeing out of Burton here in mini camps and OTAs, and they decide, let's see what we can get for him on the trade market. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, I thought if there was going to be a trade for T. Higgins, I thought it would have been during or before the draft. So I think we're kind of past that until we get, maybe mid-season, right before the trade deadline. I'm surprised it hasn't been signed at this point, but it just seems like something that he's super not interested in signing. So I don't know if we will or not.
Yeah. What do you think, AJ?
Yeah, I've heard and you never know, these reports that come out about contract stuff, what's true and what's not. But I've heard that he wasn't even asking for that much money. He was asking for kind of like a Michael Pittman type contract, or like Terry McLaurin with what they got in the last few years. And the Bengals apparently had no interest in that type of deal. And if that's the case, I don't see him signing an extension at all, because somebody will give him that money.
Mm-hmm.
But whether or not he signs the franchise tender, I'm not sure. I imagine he will end up playing this season for the Bengals. But yeah, it might depend on how some of the young guys look in camp. But yeah, I don't know.
I mean, it is a lot of money for him to give up on if he doesn't sign that tag and he decides he's going to sit, kind of like what I believe it was Le'Veon Bell did that a while back. But I mean, in the tag for receivers is what, like $21 million?
Yeah, I think it's between like 21 or 22 or something like that.
Could you imagine saying, no, I don't need that 21 million. I'm going to sit at home instead? It's
surprising.
Yeah, but I mean, the amount of money you stand to lose if you have a big injury or something is even more than that in the long term. So that's because, like, if he sits out, I don't see him hurting his market at all. Like, I think he'll still get the contract he'll get. Yeah,
I would think so as well.
But
you never know, because NFL moves on from players so quickly sometimes that being off for a year, people can forget about you and how good you are. And the teams have a lot of leverage in these situations. Next, we got Jared Goff, who did get paid 4 years, $212 million with $170 million guaranteed. The Lions have been shelling out a lot of cash this offseason, and Goff gets his slice of the pie now. I think this is a really solid move for them. He's been really good for the Lions. I think he fits what they're trying to do, both on the field and from a culture perspective. He's got great rapport with the weapons that they have there. The Lions have been a mess of a team for a really long time. And I think that they've finally kind of gotten themselves some really solid footing. And so I really like this signing for them. He's people might argue that he's not worth the amount of money that they gave him, but he's a quarterback. And if you want a quarterback, those are the contracts that you give out. So what do you think, AJ?
Yeah, I think you said it pretty much perfectly. It's like, if you just look at the money, you're like, oh man, $52 million a year for Jared Goff. Like, that doesn't feel great, but that's just what it takes to re-sign your quarterback at this point, the way that the market is. And when you have a franchise that has struggled so much over the past 40 plus years, you're coming off the best season of pretty much of your franchise's history. You have to just do whatever you can to keep the group together, and that's what they did.
Yeah, so along with Jared Goff, they've shelled out money for Penei Sewell and Amon-Ra St. Brown this offseason. And then obviously they drafted the phenom that is Sam Laporta last year. They've got a great 1-2 punch at running back with Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. Mike, what do you think is the expectation for that Lions team as far as the front office is concerned after the money they've spent in the roster that they've put together?
They better make a damn run, or somebody's going to be, getting their knees bitten in Dan Campbell. But just real quick, it's crazy that, Jared Goff was sent there to Detroit to basically like the end of his career. Like, it was supposed
he was a stopgap.
Yeah, it was supposed to be over for him. And then you could basically now play the funeral bagpipes for Hendon Hooker, because there's like no shot he's going to be relevant at this point. Yeah. So it's big for Jared Goff. He was a buy for me coming into this offseason, like a late first for a contending team. I moved him up slightly just because now he's tied to the Lions for 4 years now. So I would be willing to give up like that 1-9 range now, just if I really needed a second quarterback to put me up over the hump.
Yeah. I think that this is really cool to see for Jared Goff, because highly touted draft pick, did fine, and then it's really cool to see him kind of find his own with this Lions team and really have the success that I think everybody thought that he would have when he first came out of college. Plus that Lions team is just kind of fun to watch. Mm-hmm. Last bit of news I wanted to touch on here. Kyron Williams apparently has a minor foot injury in OTAs, so everybody should sell him for Blake Corum right away.
We actually had another running back get hurt too today.
Who's that?
Josh Jacobs.
Uh-oh.
Did not know that.
I didn't hear about that one. Was it serious or
no? It's I believe I can double check on that while we're talking, but I believe it was either a hamstring or a foot, which would be weird because both of them injured their foots. Matt LaFleur does not want to freak out about Josh Jacobs' hamstring issue.
But his fantasy owners sure will, I bet.
Yeah. We anticipate him being back pretty soon. According to the Coach Speak Index, LaFleur has a 90% reliability rating.
That's funny.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, so ever since Blake Corum got drafted, I've been hearing the whispers that, you know, Kyron's going to lose work and Blake Corum's going to take over. Sean McVay can't stick with a running back very long, and now Kyron's got a foot injury, so Blake Corum's going to be the man. I don't buy it. I think Kyron's fine. He had a minor tweak of some sort, and they said, you know what, we don't need you for OTAs. Get some rest. I don't think this is anything to freak out about, but I've already seen it on Twitter. People are just losing their minds over Blake Corum and Kyron Williams. Do you think Corum's got a shot to overtake Kyron in any scenario other than Kyron dealing with some sort of serious injury throughout the season?
I mean, I am notably low on Kyron Williams and probably a little bit higher than average on Blake Corum. So I wouldn't be surprised if we got something like a 60-40 split.
Yeah.
But anything more than that, I would be pretty surprised. And if anybody is changing their previous opinions because of a minor foot injury in May, then that is not the best process, I don't think.
Yeah. So the general rule of thumb is don't overreact during the off season. Don't listen to the coaches when they give their press conferences. You know, you have to stick with your evaluation, and then unless something tangible happens, you need to stand by that. I think Blake Corum is a good running back. I think Kyron is a good running back. I think they're both going to get work this season. I believe Kyron had like a 90% plus snap share last year, which is insane for a running back. That's not maintainable. So Blake Corum's definitely going to get some work, but I don't see a scenario where he even reaches 50-50.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. I'm not high on either one of them, to be honest with you.
Me either, but I would definitely say that Kyron's job is fairly safe for the moment. Before we get started, we have a couple of we're down to one league that we're filling right now. We've filled all of our dynasty leagues that are startups that we were working on. We'll have another batch of those coming out soon. Right now I'm working on filling the 384 team redraft tournament. That's going to be a $15 buy-in with a $4,000 first prize. It's split into 32 leagues, 12 teams per league. You'll compete weeks 1 through 12 to be the top scoring team of your league. And then weeks 13 through 17, the top scorers from each league will compete in a single elimination tournament until there's only one left, taking home that $4,000 prize. If you're interested in getting in on that action, you can get me at on Twitter at wicked_dynasty, or you can hop into our Gilded and tag me in there, and I can get you guys set up. This league also has a free entry for our Hall of Fame level Patreon subscribers. So if you are subscribed to our Patreon, or you're interested in subscribing to our Patreon, upgrade to that Hall of Fame level and your buy-in will be covered. And while we are on the subject of Patreon, I got a little ad here for you guys.
Are you ready to take over your fantasy leagues and become a champion? Get the edge you need and join the Toilets to Titles Patreon today to get exclusive access to our T2T staff, weekly waiver wire shows, and Patreon exclusive leagues like our signature Frankenstank League. Members enjoy other amazing benefits such as monthly giveaways featuring autographed jerseys, collectibles, Yeti coolers, and more. Sign up now for as little as $9.99 per month and dominate your fantasy leagues like never before. Visit patreon.com/toilets to titles and let us help take your teams to the championship this season.
All right, guys. So let's jump into it here. We're working on part 2 of our Dynasty 101 series. And today we're going to start off with talking about how to rebuild your Dynasty roster and how to identify when the time is to rebuild your Dynasty roster. So, Mike, how do you evaluate your roster to determine if you are ready or in need of a rebuild?
So if I'm a team that's kind of been backdooring into the playoffs every single year, not really making it out of the first round, either maybe even the second round, it's time to, jump ship and start rebuilding, because there's nothing worse in Dynasty than just being a middling team every single year. I mean, it's not like redraft where, you're a middling team this year, but you have a chance next year because it's, you could draft a whole new team. But in Dynasty, you're going to have the same players again next year unless you do some moves. So if I'm one of those teams where it's, constantly the 7th seed or, the 8th seed, and it's not really getting any better, and the teams ahead of me are just flooded with talent, it's time for me to start, moving some running backs, to be honest.
Yeah. What about you, AJ? How do you identify when rebuild time is?
Yeah, I think the way that I look at it is if you are sitting there with your roster construction is that of a contender, but you are steps behind some of the like true elite teams in your league. And like when I say built like a contender, I mean you have, the running backs that are probably going to produce this year or, in the immediate future, but maybe don't have, the longevity that you would think of, or, you've got older receivers like the Mike Evans, Devontae Adams, those kind of guys. And, but you're still just not quite there. And maybe you have significant holes in your lineup or whatever. And in order to become a contender, you would probably have to sell future picks to fill out your roster. And the problem in doing that is if you're not like quite there, it's so risky, because if things go wrong, then you're really in a bad spot where you don't have your picks and you have an aging roster, and that's just the worst position to be in.
Yeah. So for me, I've got kind of a few indicators. One, if I'm borderline playoff team, maybe I sneak into the last seed or just miss out. If I do that 2 or 3 years in a row, it's time to see where I'm at. Do I need to push or do I need to fall back? Another thing I'll look at is what are the top 3 or 4 teams scoring points for on the season compared to what I'm doing. Look at that over, a 2 or 3 year sample size. It's like, okay, I'm making the playoffs, but I'm being outscored by the true top teams by like 300 points a season. I'm probably not close to competing with them. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing I'll look at is the age of my roster. Do I have a bunch of Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupps? Do I've got these older quarterbacks? If my roster is getting pretty old and also not, in that top 2 or 3 of teams that are, winning and competing, then it's definitely time to move on. And so even if I've got a contending roster now, I'll look to like next season. Like, okay, I got a good chance this year, but am I going to have any shot next year when all of my guys are a year older? My roster is really starting to age out. And if I wait too much longer, I won't be able to get anything in return if I try to trade these vets. I'll look at that kind of stuff, because sometimes you've got a good roster that can compete, but it's only going to be able to compete for maybe 1 more year. And then all of those dudes are going to be worthless. If you don't have anything of value to trade for younger players or draft picks, it's really hard to execute a rebuild. It can take a long time. So in some situations, I'm okay with maybe rebuilding a year earlier than I would absolutely need to make sure that I get some return when I'm trading these older vets on my team.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I would probably rather start my rebuild a year early than a year late.
Yeah. if you don't have value to accumulate younger assets or draft picks, it takes a long time to rebuild using just your draft slots. So
yes, and sorry.
Go ahead. No,
I was just going to say the first dynasty team I ever took over was an orphan who had none of their original picks for the next like 2 years and exclusively old players. And I'm now in, I think, year 4 of that. And we are just now starting to see the light a little bit.
Yeah.
So it can be tough when you're in that position.
Yeah. So once you determine that a rebuild is necessary, what are the kind of first moves you're looking to make, AJ?
So I would say the obvious thing is just like to get rid of all your running backs.
Yeah.
I think more specifically though, I would want to get rid of the more like volatile assets that you have. Like, and what I mean by that are like, say you have Christian McCaffrey, but the rest of your team is terrible. Like, I feel pretty okay about Christian McCaffrey to where like, I don't need to like get rid of him immediately right now in May. Because like I'm afraid his value is going to tank during the season. Like I'm okay with they're waiting until the regular season and a specific team finds themselves really needing that elite running back to make the push, because you'll get a better price mid-season than you will now.
Yeah.
But a guy like Cooper Kupp, who maybe has some question marks, like with Puka Nacua taking over the volume, and like if Cooper Kupp gets off to kind of a rough start next year, his value might just tank, fall out of the floor. So like those kind of guys that I'm worried about, if things start off poorly in the regular season, that it'll significantly hurt their value. Those guys I would want to cut loose as soon as possible. And then looking to get back young receivers, young quarterbacks, future draft picks are really the big 3 things, I think.
Yep. What about you, Mike? What's the first steps that you're going to take in a rebuild?
So we both have said it now, AJ and myself, get rid of running backs just immediately, especially guys like CMC, because it is, for most leagues, it is a max points for, you want to get rid of those high scoring players, and I also want to mention, you want to tear everything down. You want to, start over, gut everything, but you want to make sure you have like pillars in place, building blocks in place, 1 or 2 players that you're okay holding on to because you think, their value may increase the following year, or could be a steady roster player for the next few years. Like, not Drake London now, but Drake London last year would be a great player to hold on to because, he wasn't scoring a whole lot of points because Desmond Ridder is just airmailing everything. But, he was a top, 8 pick in the NFL draft, top 10 pick in the NFL draft. He's a wide receiver, and those are gold in Dynasty. So you just want to identify those guys that you think their value could turn forward, and either try to go acquire those guys or hold on to those guys and get rid of, like AJ said, the high volatility guys, whatever the word is, and your high scoring players. Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously we can all agree step 1 of a rebuild is sell your running backs. Their shelf life is just too short. And so it does not make sense to hold on to any starting running back. I don't care if you've got Breece Hall and Bijan Robinson as your 2 starters at running back, you need to sell them because running backs do nothing but lose value. And they're, generally speaking, they don't last very long in terms of elite fantasy production. So it does not make sense to hold on to them while you're in the middle of a 2 or 3 season rebuild, because by the time you're ready to compete again, they may have lost a step, blown out their knee. There's just too many scenarios where a running back is no longer useful to you at the end of a rebuild. And those players can typically fetch you a pretty good price when you're like selling them to a contender. So that helps you as part of your rebuilding process. And then back to what you were saying, Mike, about having some pillars to lean on. Like if you have Sam Laporte on your roster, you don't need to sell him during your rebuild. That's somebody that you can hold on to because he's still going to be just as valuable to your team in 2 or 3 seasons as he would be to you now. So those types of players that are going to be elite at the end of your rebuild that are still going to help you, you want to hold on to. Don't sell those guys. The only other thing I'll say about kind of the process is there's windows that are good to sell in to accumulate assets for your rebuild. So typically, if you're looking to get into premium position during rookie drafts, do not try to buy rookie picks right before the rookie draft, because that's when peak value on those picks is. A good time to try to acquire those rookie picks is about mid-season, the season prior. So like going into this season, if you decide, hey, I'm going to need to rebuild, then around your trade deadline in your dynasty league, you need to be looking to flip some of your guys and buying 2024 draft picks or 2025 draft picks, because that's when you're going to get the best return on your investment, because those fringe playoff teams, or even like sometimes the top teams in your league, they're going to be willing to pay a little bit more to secure that asset that you're giving up to make a playoff push. Whereas if you're trying to buy a draft pick a week before the draft, everybody's rookie hyped, so it's really expensive. So you need to identify those windows within your league on where you can maximize the value when deconstructing your roster for draft picks or younger players, and take advantage of those. You have to be patient with this sell-off process. Don't feel like I got to sell everybody today, because you'll end up just getting ripped off, because people will see that, oh, he's tearing down the roster. It's a fire sale. We can just go in there and he'll just accept whatever draft pick I throw at him, because that's what he needs. So make sure that you're patient with your rebuild, and you're making sure that you're still getting good deals and you're still getting good value, and don't feel like you have to sell everybody all at once. And then aside from obviously buying draft picks, which is where you're going to do the most of your rebuilding, I think it's a good idea to buy younger players who maybe have disappointed a little bit, but still have high upside that could break out, in year 2 or year 3. Those guys are typically pretty cheap. And so that is a good gamble to take when you're in a rebuild, because if even 1 or 2 of those guys hit, it can really help you and accelerate the overall timeline of completing your rebuild. So Mike, what are some keys that you would throw out there for people on how to be successful with your rebuild?
So you kind of mentioned it, is identifying the hot times to start throwing some trades out there, putting players on the block. I do have a tendency, and it's kind of stupid, when a player blows up that I'm looking to move, immediately hit that, on the block button on Sleeper.
Yeah.
And then there's
ride the hype wave.
Yeah, ride the hype wave. Try to make that move. But there's getting closer to your trade deadline in Dynasty is when things start turning into like an auction process. Those top teams are trying to buy, those older aging running backs, those older quarterbacks like the Baker Mayfields, and the players that are going to score pretty decently towards the end of the season. So I really think that's the best time to start making those moves. I completely agree with what you said, Dylan.
Right on. What do you think, AJ? What are the keys to a successful rebuild?
I think, it sounds super obvious, but just accumulating as much value as you can and accumulating ascending value. So like, obviously, like you said, you don't want to focus 100% on picks, and you want to, if you can take shots on some younger players that have been hurt by their situations, that's a good thing to do as well. But picks will always go up in value unless, you're buying it. The only time they don't is if you buy a first from a team that shouldn't be very good, and then they turn out to be better than you thought. But
don't you hate when that happens?
Yeah. But in general, like if I were to buy someone's 2026 first right now, like this is the lowest that pick will ever be valued. Like
right.
it is guaranteed to go up in value come 2026 or even come next year. So just thinking about buying things earlier, like don't be worried about, getting a 2026 pick instead of a 2025 or a 2025 instead of a 2024. Like it doesn't matter for you, and you have no team needs when you're not competing. So don't worry about what your positions look like. If you have like all receivers and no running backs, that's good, because receivers are easy to trade when you do eventually start to compete.
Yeah.
You want to put all of your assets into places where they will go up, meaning picks and wide receivers.
Yeah. I would say the only other thing I would add is during the process of your rebuild, generally speaking, you want to go best player available during your drafts because, like you said, you don't really have any team needs. However, I do recommend prioritizing every position above running back because, again, running backs have such a short shelf life and their value swings so dramatically so quickly sometimes that it can be a risky pick during your rebuild. Typically, if I'm rebuilding, running back is the last hole that I like to plug. And in a lot of cases, what I'm doing is I get most of the roster set, and then I'll trade for a running back that's already established rather than utilizing my draft capital to draft one. But that's just the recommendation. If there's a clear talent difference between a running back that's on the board in your rookie draft and maybe a wide receiver, go ahead and take the running back because you can always trade him for more draft capital or different assets. But if you've got a running back and a receiver that are relatively close, but the running back is a little bit ahead, I tend to give other positions, running back or wide receiver, tight end, and quarterbacks, I'll give them a little value bump during my rebuild that in many cases will push them ahead of running backs that are similarly valued.
And one more thing that I kind of forgot to touch on was as much as we've been talking negatively about running backs when you're rebuilding, I think handcuffs, backup running back are something where you can, it's really easy to capitalize on value there. Because if you have, like, to use last year as an example, like if you had Gus Edwards, Devin Singletary, Chuba Hubbard, all guys who started the year as backups. Zach Moss, yep. All guys who started the year as backups and were eventually thrust into starting roles either, because they earned it or because of injury. You can sell those guys to contenders right when they get the job because, a contender will throw you, even if it's just a third-round pick for a guy like Devin Singletary, who Devin Singletary gives you no value on your roster if you're rebuilding. But you can just get those late-round picks. And I think accumulating late-round picks is really, really important for when your rookie drafts come. It makes it so much easier to navigate the board, trading up and down to, get guys who are falling or just, get, and pick up a particular guy that you want to get. And kind of similar on that note is pay a lot of attention to waivers because every once in a while, it's pretty rare, but every once in a while, some guy will, be thrust into a starting role or a backup role on waivers. And if you can pick them up and move them for a third or something, it makes a big difference when you start stacking these moves together.
Yeah, totally agree. Having backup running backs is really great advantage for a rebuilding team because if they never get a starting job, you don't care because you don't need to win. But if they do get a starting job, man, you've got a free draft pick coming to you. And back to what you said about accumulating late picks, man, don't be afraid to make 5 selections in the third round because chances are somebody in the third round pretty much every year is hitting.
Like, look at the third round right now. Like the players we're getting in the third round right now. That's crazy value right now.
I mean, I don't know. I can't remember what his ADP was in rookie drafts last year, but I know like Sam Laporta was routinely available like late second, early third in my rookie drafts. So if you've got a bunch of low seconds and third round picks, you could easily hit on a couple of guys over the course of your rebuild that would be amazing values for the draft slot that you selected them at.
Yeah, definitely.
And then last thing I want to touch on with these rebuilds is give people a general idea of how long they should take, so that people can set their expectations properly. It's unlikely that you're going to execute a rebuild start to finish in one off season. So I want to make sure that people know, like, okay, this is what I'm committing to. Maybe they're taking over an orphan that needs a rebuild and there's, a buy-in involved. Like, I want to make sure that people understand the commitment that they should have on how long it's going to take. So Mike, in your eyes, in your experience, how long should people be committing to a rebuild for?
I would say at the least 2 to 3 years, probably. And I think that's what you should shoot for. That's kind of what I did. I had a team where I started accumulating 2023 picks, and I was like, this team isn't really going to be great in 2023. So let me start accumulating 2024 as well, 2 years ago. So I ended up with like 4 first rounders in 2023, and I believe 2 in 2024. And I ended up with guys like Anthony Richardson, Bijan, JSN last year, and then a couple players this year. I forget exactly, but like those are the kind of things you need to be ready for. Is 2 to 3 years is how long I think rebuilds probably take at a minimum. And don't get frustrated right away if that second year rebuild is not starting to look great, because once you start accumulating those picks and those picks turn into players, the third year could really be, your third year breakout is what we say for wide receivers.
Yeah.
So
what do you think, AJ? How long are you typically committing to a rebuild for?
Yeah, I think it depends on like, there's, degrees to rebuilds. Like I mentioned earlier with the first orphan I took over, that's probably the worst shape I've ever seen a dynasty team in. And that has taken about 4 years, and things are looking, fairly good. So like, that's probably the longest that it should ever take if you're building up an absolute disaster. I would say just if you're starting a rebuild now, coming into this next year, by the end of this coming season, you should at least see some progress. And then by the end of the following season is when you should be looking to compete in that third season, I guess it would be.
Yeah.
And if you're not at that point, then I think you don't want to just restart everything, obviously. So I think that's when you need to maybe start being a little aggressive with some of your moves. Like maybe, like, don't be stupid, but just some riskier, like high variance decisions. Because you don't, like, once you get into, the fourth year of your rebuild and things are still not there, like they might just never turn around.
Yeah.
That's how orphans happen.
Yep.
I would say one other thing, we talked about earlier, like you should identify, when you're rebuilding, the teams that are trying to compete. You should also identify the teams that are active, because it's kind of hard to rebuild if the entire league's not active, and you need to identify those guys. There's always a dude in a league that should be rebuilding but keeps trying to push their chips in. It just doesn't work out for them. So identify those guys as well.
Yeah.
It's a big thing, and I love active leagues. So just look for those like 2 or 3 people that are always trying to make moves for anything.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's always one dude in every league who's just bored, and he plays Dynasty so that he can negotiate trades all day, and that's just
Sometimes
their
that's me. Sometimes that's me.
Yeah. Yeah. As for me, I like to shoot for 2 years on my rebuilds. So 2 full off seasons is kind of my baseline. I don't think you can really do it faster than that in most cases, unless you're doing like a minor retooling where, maybe you sell off a little bit, perform poorly for a year, get a high draft pick, plug in a couple of playmakers, and then you're ready to compete again. Those situations do happen, but I'm as far as like a full, like, committed rebuild, I think 2 full off seasons is the minimum. I think after 4 off seasons, if you're not ready to compete again,
burn it down again.
You might not be able to, because if you're 4 off seasons into a rebuild and you're not ready to compete, you probably aren't ready to compete because you tore your roster down and didn't do a good job repairing it. And so you might not have the assets required to accumulate for a rebuild. And in those situations, it's really tough because at that point, really your only option is to grin and bear it for multiple years while you slowly build a roster. And that can be really brutal.
Drift into madness pretty much at that point.
Yeah, that's where and 9 times out of 10, that team gets orphaned. Mm-hmm. And then somebody else comes in and they do the second half of the 8-year rebuild.
So problem is with me, Mama ain't raising no quitter, so I'm going until the very end.
Yeah, so it can be tough. I would shoot for 2 off seasons. If it takes you more than 4, you need to. I would say at that point you need to reevaluate your rookie scouting system, because it probably if you're 4 full off seasons into a rebuild and not close to competing yet, you're probably not doing very well at selecting guys in the rookie drafts. You're probably missing on a lot of your picks. So that's where I would start in that situation, is kind of evaluate yourself and be like, okay, why do I suck at drafting rookies? What am I doing wrong? Find some resources to help you in that regard. And then for me also, like when I get to a point where, I'm creeping back towards middle of the pack during my rebuild, that's kind of a signal to me of, okay, now let's, instead of accumulating these draft picks, maybe let's try to move some of them to other teams and pick up some vets or some other pieces so that I can try to propel myself into that competing territory. Because what you don't want to do is get stuck in the middle. And so if you're doing a rebuild and you've been doing it for 2 or 3 seasons now, you probably have a very young roster. And if you've creeped back up to, about middle of the pack in your league, that's the perfect opportunity to be like, okay, next season's draft picks are not mine anymore. I'm giving them to somebody else so that I can get some players in here to try to make a run. So that's kind of the way that I approach rebuilds. Anything else that you guys want to add?
No, I think we
got it
pretty much covered it.
Cool. All right. Well, here in just a minute, we're going to talk about these rookie drafts and how you guys can be successful. So stay tuned for that next.
Looking for a place to connect with fellow fantasy football fanatics? Well, look no further than our Gilded server. Join the Title Tribe, where you can chat, strategize, and debate about all things football. Whether you're swapping lineup advice, discussing the latest trades, or fearlessly defending your favorite player, our Gilded server is the perfect spot to hang out with like-minded fans. Our Gilded server is free to join, and the link can be found in the video description or on our website at toiletstotitles.com. We look forward to seeing you in the tribe.
All right, guys. So we're going to talk rookie drafts here for a little bit and tell people, how can they be successful within these rookie drafts so that they make sure they don't get themselves into an 8-year rebuild. I know for us, how we approach rookie drafts is a lot different than how most people approach rookie drafts, because we produce content here on T2T, and for we have our own projects that we work on as well. So we're very dialed into the rookie classes, sometimes well before they're entering the NFL. We're watching college tape. We're doing all the scouting stuff that the average person does not do. So how do you think an average person that does not do all that extra stuff should go about their rookie evaluations and preparing for rookie drafts? Start with you, Mike.
All right. So if you're not a degenerate like myself, if you want to watch film, that's great. Obviously, you don't need to do that, especially if you're not a degenerate, like I said. But, start looking at the scouting reports on players, identify the guys you think that could really make the jump in the NFL. Drafting best player available in rookie drafts, to me, is like the biggest thing. And, getting a head start on those guys by reading the scouting reports. AJ mentioned PFF earlier is a good resource to kind of look at stats and stuff like that. Just try to be, well prepared, even if you are not, grinding like we are, even still. I mean, like I said, I'm in a Devy draft right now. So I'm trying to gauge who's going to, hit in 2025 and 2026 and now 2027. So it's good to just have something you feel comfortable, looking at, whether it's scouting reports, tape, stats. You just need to find your comfort zone.
Yeah. What about you, AJ? What do you think most people should be doing to get prepared for their rookie drafts?
Yeah, I think so. If you're not going to be, really creating your own process for scouting or, data analysis or whatever, then how I did it when I started was you find a couple of people in the space who you trust and who's, if you consume content the Toilets to Title stuff or, from some of the big creators that are out there, Find a couple of guys that you trust and listen to them. And what I think is best is get a couple of guys who come at things from different perspectives. So maybe you have a film guy that you really like, and you like, the way that he analyzes players. And then maybe you have a data guy that you like, and you can, look at two things from different perspectives. And if both sides of things, both of your guys agree on something, agree on a certain player being a target, then that probably is a really good sign. And if they're both down on a player, that's probably not a good sign.
Well, I will say, one thing that you mentioned is try not to also take in too much content, because that's when it starts to become like jumbled in your brain. Like you have no idea what to do. So for me, when I was doing my dog scores, I was watching the film, and then I would hear or see other people say like, oh, I don't think this player is, very good at X thing. And then I have them at, doing something decently. And now like, well, hell, am I doing something wrong here? You know what I mean? So find the guys you like. Don't take too much information in, but also have your own opinion on these guys as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think taking in too much stuff can, like you said, you get your wires crossed, and you can start to second guess your opinions and everything. So I think that's definitely good advice.
Yeah, so I'd recommend the Toilets to Titles podcast network. We got great content for you guys. Yeah, I think that might be us. Okay. We've got great film analysts. We've got guys that do scour PFF for analytical profiles. We do shows all the time, usually 3 or 4 shows a week on various topics. And during rookie season, it's pretty much all rookies. And then I know I'm pretty sure both of you were working on our rookie write-ups, our draft profiles, right? So every offseason leading up to the NFL draft, we have a team that will evaluate film and analytics on players and put together a draft profile with some opinions and some analysis in there for you guys. You can find that on the website at toiletstotitles.com. But just generally speaking, I agree with what you guys said. You need to find a few people that you enjoy their content and enjoy listening to, because if you could be the best football guy in the world, but if you don't deliver your material in a way that resonates with somebody, they're not going to listen to you. So you got to find a person that you don't mind consuming their content. I like to find people who think differently than me. So like it sounds silly, but one of the things that I'll do is I'll find the guys who are just in love with every running back that comes out, because I hate running backs, and that creates a bias within me when I'm evaluating running backs and where I should put them as far as my rankings go in rookie drafts. So I like to find a couple of guys who are really high on rookies, on rookie running backs, so that I can get some unbiased advice on where these guys are actually going. And then, I like what you need to find somebody who is a film guy. You need to find somebody who's an advanced analytics guy, because they are evaluating that player very differently. And so if you can come to a consensus that, hey, this dude is really good, no matter what you look at, then that's where you get prospects like, Marvin Harrison Jr. this year, who's basically can't miss, going to be great. Not anything to say negatively about him for the most part. So
I think all I heard there was between film and analytics matching. I think all I heard there was Bucky Irving, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. And then at the end of the day, though, you have to form your own opinion. And I think this is a hole that a lot of new dynasty managers fall into, is that they are unsure and they're inexperienced. So they will just follow the line of whatever X media guy is saying today. And you have to obviously consume the content, read the articles, but you still have to utilize that material to form your own opinion. Don't let that material become your opinion by default. Because if you do that, you're probably going to end up making a lot of mistakes in your rookie drafts, because pay attention to one rookie cycle and see how wild and crazy these takes get over the course of 3 months. And B, if you're just letting a Twitter guy tell you who to draft every year, you're not improving yourself as a dynasty manager. And in my opinion, you're missing out on one of the most fun aspects of dynasty football. And the reason why most people play dynasty football is to build our teams through rookie drafts and those sorts of things. And if you're not able to do any sort of baseline evaluating on your own or create your own opinions on these players, you're probably not going to be a long-time dynasty player because you're kind of missing the key aspects that makes it enjoyable.
Yeah, there's no better feeling than when a rookie hits that you're super high on. Maybe it's a little bit more than consensus, or
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. It's a great feeling. It's also equally crushing when you're wrong.
Never lost, as LeVar Ball said.
So we've been talking about advanced analytics here a couple of times. So what are some analytical metrics that you guys look for when you're doing your player evaluations? We'll start with you, AJ.
Yeah,
Mr. PFF guy.
So I will say, when I first started with Dynasty, I was big analytics first with everything, just because that's kind of where my background comes from. But as I've done this for a little while, I've come to switch my opinion a little bit to when it comes to going from college to NFL. I think a lot of the analytics that people tend to use don't quite do justice how different college environments can be from like an offensive perspective of like, there are so many things, so many factors that play into somebody's production that aren't just their production or aren't more than just their talent. So I think this is, not a little bit of a weird answer. I'm not going to exactly give a specific data point, but I would say dig into context of why a player did or didn't produce. So like a good example would be Zay Flowers in college. He put up good numbers. His analytics looked good, but they weren't on the level of like Jordan Addison, Quentin Johnston, some of those other receivers that got drafted around him. But, he was on Boston College, a team with just an absolute disaster of an offense. Offensive coordinator was a disaster. Quarterback was a disaster. Every other pass catcher was terrible. Like everything about that offense centered around him. And there's a reason for that because he's really good.
Yeah.
So stuff like that, I think is really important. Just, figure out the context behind the data that you're looking at. What
about you, Mike?
So,
are there any analytic stats that you kind of feel are important when you're putting your profiles together?
So I'm not the biggest numbersman. Numbers confuse me. I was never the smartest kid, to be honest. But I do like some things for running backs. I know we keep, trashing running backs this entire episode, but
used to it.
Yeah. But the things I like for them are, missed tackles forced by attempt per attempt. I think that's a good indicator of how elusive a running back is. You do need some elusivity in a running back. Yards after contact, I think, is another big one. Stuff like that. Wide receivers, yards per route run. Those are pretty decent indicators on how good a player is or how involved they are in their offense. Stuff like that.
Yeah. So for me, the only real analytics stat that I like enough to maybe sway my decision on a player a little bit is yards per route run for receivers. Just because it tends to be a very sticky stat year to year, and it's got a pretty good predictor rate on if somebody can get open. Mm-hmm. Other than that, I mainly will use analytics just to confirm or deny what I see on tape, or just simply, watching the games. Because I do watch a lot of college football, so I see a lot of these guys before you start hearing about them during rookie season. So basically, I'll have an opinion on this player already, and then I'll look up their analytical profile and be like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Or I don't know that I agree with that. Maybe I should go back and take a look and see where they're getting this number from. I do really like PFF's stable metrics, their elusive rating and that kind of stuff. I think that's kind of helpful to gauge athleticism and how shifty a player can be and those sorts of things. Like with anything, the analytics are a tool, and it's can be very valuable. But if it's the only thing that you're looking at, it can be pretty misleading because there's tons of guys with great analytical profiles in college who do nothing in the NFL.
Yeah.
And I think some of that is because in a lot of instances, there's just massive talent gaps between teams in college football that you don't see in the NFL.
Yeah.
There is one other. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, AJ.
I was just, since I guess, relatively speaking, I am sort of the analytics guy of the three of us. I'll say some more, add in some more specific things that I like to look at. I think rather than looking at like counting stats or even like yards per route run is great. But the one thing with that is it's very much influenced by quarterback because it's, in order to complete passes, the passes have to be on target.
You have to get there.
Right. Yeah. And offensive line too plays a big part in that. I think things like target share and like targets per route run can be really helpful to look at. Like if a guy is getting targeted constantly in their college offense, like it's probably because they're pretty good. Like you have cases with guys like Quentin Johnson and Treylon Burks are big examples of guys who are heavily targeted and putting up big numbers. But a lot of that is because they were being schemed open. And that's where the film has to come in.
Yeah.
You can separate those type of things. But as a face value thing and as a starter, I think if a guy's getting targeted a ton, it's a good indication because it's not just that shows you that they are a step above the guys that they're competing with in their own room, like their own receiver room in college. And also on that note, look at the competition that somebody's dealing with. So like if like Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, all the Ohio State guys, like their numbers are not going to pop quite as much because they're competing with each other for targets. Like
right.
There are only so many targets to go around. So that's also a really important thing, I think.
Yeah. So how does the state of your team, your dynasty roster, affect your approach in a rookie draft? Are you strictly best player available? How much does your team need weigh into your decision making? Would you give guys a decent size bump if you need to fill a hole on your roster, even if you know that they're probably not the better player?
I can. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I'm kind of the best player available guy for the most part. There has been instances where I've taken, like a running back where I didn't really need to, but my team needed it, so I did it. That just feels icky for some reason. In my opinion, drafting best player available and then trading for need is the easiest way to go or the better way to go, just in my opinion. Because, say, for instance, I don't know, Keon Coleman was a guy that is pretty polarizing. I think you could flip him to get like if you need a running back for a kind of established running back that maybe isn't like super great, but a team that's rebuilding could use Keon Coleman. And, you could get those running backs for that price.
Yeah. What about you, AJ?
I would say that honestly, it doesn't change my approach very much at all. Outside of the fact that if I'm competing, I will maybe weigh landing spot a little more heavily than I would otherwise. But nothing too drastic. And then also if I'm competing, I might be more willing to be aggressive in the draft and like trade future picks to move up in the current draft just to kind of speed up, get younger players earlier as opposed to the following year. Yeah. But generally speaking, I just like to take best player available. I think that's why having tiered rankings is really important. Don't just rank your guys, 1 to 48 or whatever. Put them into tiers where the way I think about it is I'll have a tier, you might have a tier at the top of this draft of, or maybe like, below Caleb, you might have those next 3 quarterbacks all in the same tier. So that are like I would guess a better example would be those quarterbacks in the same tier as Malik Neighbors or Rome Odunze. So like they're all like I can see the argument for putting any of them above any of them.
Right.
I personally have them in a particular order, but like I get, it makes sense to. I'm not going to argue with somebody who has them differently. So that's where I would be like, I really need a quarterback, so I'll take Jaden Daniels over Odunze, even though I have Odunze ranked ahead of him.
Yeah. So for me, I'll pretty much always take best player available, except if I need a quarterback in Superflex. If I have a need at quarterback in Superflex, I will 100% reach if I have to, just because it is so impossible to trade for a good quarterback in Superflex. That's really the only situation where I would take a player over a clearly better player. So like you're talking about tiers. If I've got a quarterback that's a tier below, I would probably still take that quarterback just because the value of quarterbacks in the Superflex league is so inflated that it's really difficult to trade for them. But other than that, generally speaking, you're going to be best served by just getting the best player in a dynasty league, because trade value will overtake your need. And so like Mike said, take the better player, trade him if you need to, because in a lot of situations, maybe you need a running back, you take the better receiver. You can go trade that better receiver for a running back plus something else on top. So always taking the best player available is typically a good approach to have.
I do like what you said about the quarterbacks, though, as well, because I think that's one of the positions that their value doesn't plummet as quickly as other positions.
Well, and they don't even have to be very good to be highly valued.
Exactly.
Like Bo Nix is going to be a starting quarterback. He does not need to be very good to have good trade value, because there's only 32 starting quarterbacks and he's a first round pick. He's going to maintain value even if he sucks. Exactly. And so I will reach on a quarterback sometimes if I am in desperate need of one, because they're just so expensive to trade for.
Yeah. Like look at Bryce Young this year.
Yeah, I mean, he was terrible, but he's still expensive if you want to trade for him.
His rookie year really couldn't have gone any worse. Like I think most of it probably wasn't his fault, but like even regardless of that, like statistically couldn't have gone any worse. And you still got to use like a 5th round startup on him.
Yeah,
you still have to give up. You would still definitely have to give up a first for him at this point.
Yeah, the price of quarterbacks is just so inflated that I'm willing to take a swing on a quarterback in my rookie drafts, even if I've got like a receiver that's even a tier 2 above, just because they're so expensive to trade for, especially if you want a good one. If you want a good quarterback, good luck trading for one unless you want to give up half your roster. Like it's tough. So, but aside from that situation, generally best player available is the approach you want to take, especially if you're new. If you're a beginner, I would recommend being a little more conservative, not taking as many risks in the beginning while you're getting your feet wet and you're kind of learning the ropes. Because if you dig yourself in a hole with some bad draft picks because you reached a little bit, it can zap the fun out of it for you, because you're in a hole when you're just getting started. And that can kind of kill the vibe a little bit if you're not used to it. So I would recommend maybe being on the safer side of things as you're just getting started and kind of getting your bearings and learning the ropes. All right, guys. So the last thing we're going to talk about today is orphan teams and the unique challenges that are involved in taking over an orphan. We will be talking about that next.
Are you looking for the latest and greatest in fantasy football insights? Well, look no further than toiletstotitles.com. Our website is your go-to destination for all things fantasy football, offering an endless stream of articles, rankings, and analysis to help you dominate your league. From weekly waiver wire targets to in-depth player profiles, we've got you covered with the insight you need to make informed decisions and stay ahead of the competition. So why wait? Head over to toiletstotitles.com today and take your fantasy game to the next level.
All right, guys, we're running a little long, so we're going to touch on this one briefly. I don't think there's as much to say here anyway, but for those of you who are new to Dynasty and don't know, an orphan team is a team that that has been abandoned by the existing manager. They left their dynasty league. They left their team unattended. It's up for the taking. You decide you're going to join the league and take over that existing team. And sometimes you're taking over a good team, but most of the time you're taking over a terrible team because that's why the person left. AJ, I'm going to start with you because you've already touched on the terrible orphan that you inherited.
Yes.
And you said it was early in your dynasty career. So what were some unique challenges that maybe you weren't initially prepared for that you maybe had to learn as you went, that you can drop some knowledge on people to maybe they can shorten their rebuild time?
Yeah. I would say the big thing that I dealt with, because it was the first dynasty team that I had. I didn't even really know the dynasty was a thing until I heard about this, and I just took this team over. A lot of times you're not going to have your own picks, because that's a lot of times why people leave, is because they trade their own picks and then their team is bad, and then they're like, well, there's no hope, so they leave. When you don't have your own picks, it can be really hard. That is one situation where I would say you don't necessarily have to be tanking and trying to limit your max points like we were talking about before, or like getting to get a better draft pick because you don't have one. And then that's also a situation where I would say it is maybe a little more okay to trade your younger corner piece type assets, because those are going to be long-term rebuilds. And if you can tier down from some of your really strong assets, one of the very first trades that I made with that orphan was trading AJ Brown for Jalen Waddle, who had just been drafted, and 2 more first-round picks. That was
gives yourself a good start.
Granted, those 2 first-round picks ended up being Sky Moore and Christian Watson. But
oh no!
Oh, you should have left that part out.
But if I'd been a little smarter and maybe not drafted those 2 players, things could have gone better. But the point is, when you tier down like that from your, because these orphans are going to be longer term projects. Plus, you might, hopefully, the commissioner isn't making you pay right away. So you don't have to worry so much about the buy-ins right away. I didn't have to pay for the first year, and I think I paid only half the second year. Which is, if you're a commissioner, by the way, that is what you should do. So yeah, those are some of the kind of unique things about orphans.
What about you, Mike? You had any unique situations with orphan team? Any challenges people should be prepared for?
The only time I only took over 1 orphan, and it wasn't awful, to be honest with you. It wasn't the worst case scenario, like AJ was saying. I basically started to, sell the older pieces, part of the team, like Amari Cooper, for a couple picks and a player, stuff like that. The biggest thing I will say about orphans is, AJ kind of already mentioned it, but make sure you look at the roster and you look at the picks before you agree. I mean, I feel like that's common sense, but make sure you're looking at everything before you just, jump into something, because you don't want to be stuck forever with that team, and you don't want to leave the next person even in a worse off situation when you orphan that team. So
yeah, always make sure you're evaluating an orphan's roster and their draft pick situation before you agree to accept. And please, if you're going to agree to accept to this orphan, take care of it. Don't be the guy that takes over an orphan and then re-orphans it the next season. Be committed. You're getting a look at what you're dealing with before you sign up. Make sure that it's something that you actually want to take on before you agree. And I would say that the biggest challenge that I've personally faced with orphan teams is that most of the time you're joining an established league, and in some cases a league that has been established for a very long time. And so it can be difficult because everybody else in the league has kind of already learned each other's tendencies and built up rapport. They know this guy loves receivers. This guy loves running backs. This guy's really easy to trade with. This guy's going to try to rip you off every time. They already have a lot of that figured out. And so you're kind of behind the ball in that sense. And so it can be tough. Whereas with a startup, you're all usually coming into the league together, same time, and you're all learning each other at the same time. And so when you're coming into an orphan team, the league already has that relationship and that rapport, and they've already got all of that information about their league mates through years of playing with them. And so you have to kind of pick up on those things really quickly. Because knowing your league and how it operates and people in your league and what they like and what they do and what their habits are and their tendencies within their roster construction or how they draft and those sorts of things is really important to building a successful team.
Yeah, I think those are great points. One thing I kind of want to add is because we just talked about the unique challenges, the unique things that I think makes taking over an orphan fun is there are just so many players in Dynasty at this point that I just have no chance of having shares of because I was just much lower on when they were rookies. So I didn't draft them in any of my leagues. And when you take over an orphan, you'll get players on it that you have where you're like, ooh, like I get to now shop these players that like I think are sell highs, where I just don't have them on my roster because I don't think they're very good, but like other people do. And it just gives you a chance to trade with like more different players that you're not used to.
That's a good one.
I think it's another good thing about an orphan team is it always feels good to win in any fantasy football league. But I think it feels a little bit extra good when you take over a terrible orphan that has just been ran into the dirt for 5 years and you rebuild it and come back and win a championship. That's just such an awesome feeling. And personally, like I like doing rebuilds. And so if I don't have any rosters that in my dynasty leagues that I'm actively rebuilding, that's when I'll go out and I'll actually hunt for bad orphans that I can, because I always like to have at least one or two teams that I'm actively rebuilding. So it can be a lot of fun. And like you said, AJ, in a lot of cases, your buy-in is covered for a year or two at least. So that helps you kind of get into the league without having to fork over any dough while you're fixing the mess left behind by the previous manager.
Yep.
All right, guys. Any closing thoughts, AJ?
Honestly, not really. I think we covered a good bit of stuff. I guess all I'll say is don't get addicted to rebuilding, and winning championships is actually, fun fact, better than having the number one overall pick.
Yeah.
Because as fun as it is to have draft picks, winning is even more fun.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's people in some of my leagues that are just perpetually rebuilding. And it's a little
fun.
funny.
Can't blame them.
It's a little funny. We call them the buy-in donators. They never have any chance of winning, but they're just there to hang out and rebuild their roster every 2-3 years. So
you got to.
We don't mind. What about you, Mike? Any closing thoughts?
No real closing thoughts. And one thing I did forget to mention at the beginning of the show, I will be a guest on the Under the Helmet Dynasty podcast with Chad Parsons next week.
Man.
So be on the lookout for that. And that's, one thing I forgot to mention that I have coming up.
Sweet.
Yeah. Well, for me, the two things that I want to close with are don't let FOMO convince you to make bad trades for rookie pick. You see that so often during rookie season. You built a great roster, but you built it by selling your 2023 first round pick and your 2023 second round pick, but you've got an awesome roster and you're going to be just fine. You don't need to do anything during the rookie draft. You're going to be good. And then the rookie draft is about to kick off and you are just so mad that you don't get to participate and you make a terrible deal where you get absolutely screwed over, but you'll take it because you just want that 104 so that you can participate. Don't let that happen. Make sure that if you commit to, I'm going to be competitive, I'm selling these picks, and then you build a really good roster that's going to compete, do not make the mistake of selling off pieces just so that you can be in the draft. If a deal comes along where you can get into the draft and you feel like it makes your team better, great, do that. But don't have the FOMO during rookie draft and make a bad trade that's going to set you back. And then also, AJ, you said don't get addicted to rebuilds. I'm going to say don't be scared of a rebuild. I see all the time people are just terrified to tear the roster down because, oh my God, it's going to take 3 seasons for me to be competitive again. It's like, dude, you haven't made the playoffs in 5 years. Like you're rebuilding. You're just doing it slower because you're getting 107 instead of 102. So don't be afraid to tear your roster down and do a rebuild if that's where your roster is at. You need to be very observant of how you're performing. And if a rebuild is necessary, don't be scared of it. It's a lot of fun. Take advantage of the opportunity to get into those rookie drafts and have a bunch of picks. That's a lot of fun. Like, yes, you're not going to compete for 2 or 3 years, but if you are a regular finisher in 5 through 7 in your league, like you're not competing anyway. You're rebuilding. You're just not doing it good. Mm-hmm. So don't be afraid to hit that rebuild button and get yourself a new roster after a couple of years. All right, guys, that's going to be it for us today. Next week, we're going to be doing a My Guys episode. So this is non-premium players that we're going to be pounding the table for in 2024 and beyond. We're not going to be talking about, Justin Jefferson or Bijan Robinson. Everybody knows that you want those guys. We're going to be looking at some non-premium players that really are the backbone of most championship rosters. Typically in a dynasty league, everybody's got 1 or 2 of those elite guys. But the thing that sets the championship rosters apart is that middle tier of players that they have that step up for them during the season and during the playoffs. So those are the guys that we're going to be talking about next week. My name is Dylan. You can find me on Twitter at Wicked_Dynasty or in the Gilded chat as Wicked. You can find Mike at Dynasty Dog Mike on Twitter and AJ at AJ_FF Ball. All right, guys, it's been a pleasure, and I will see you next week.
See you guys next week.